Hi, I'm Brian with BibleStudying.net, and I want to move on now to the last couple of religions that we're going to talk about in our comparative religion study in terms of the historical aspects of them. And the next two are sort of paired together. It's Babism and Baha'ism. Let's just get real quickly into what we know about these historically. The Bab, who is the founder of Babism, turns out also he's sort of the founder of Baha'ism, is born on October 20th, 1819. And so he's a figure of the 19th century. In terms of our historical documentation, our ability to identify whether or not he existed, this should be no problem whatsoever. This isn't really where the issue is going to lie with this religion. But let's find out a little bit more about this particular point of view. The Bab is, of course, not his real name. His real name is Mirza Ali Muhammad. He is claimed to be the Bab, or gateway, to the hidden Imam. Well, what's the Imam? It's the perfect embodiment of the Islamic faith. And his claim to be the gateway to this Imam gave rise to the Baha'i religion, and made him one of the central figures of the Baha'i faith. So, of both religions. Well, what is the Baha'i faith? According to the Baha'i religion, according to Britannica.com, originally grew out of the Babi faith, or sect, which was founded in 1844 by Mirza Ali Muhammad of Shiraz in Iran. So this is coming out of Iran in the 19th century. And what do we know about this in terms of our ability to corroborate it historically? Well, it's interesting. We do find some possibility for corroboration here in terms of predictions that are made by these religions together. Well, what predictions does it make? First of all, it's notable that they're offshoots of Islam. So to a very large extent, their historical reliability is going to depend on Islam and its historical reliability. And Islam, as we said, pretty much entirely depends on whether or not the Old Testament and New Testament point us to Islam or point us away from Islam. And we'll cover that largely in another separate study on Islam. But it's interesting that the Baha'i faith, the Babism, shouldn't be largely viewed as one of many, many religions that are out there that should be viewed as part of Islam, largely. The Baha'i faith, let's look at some of these predictions here, according to Britannica.com. They proclaimed a spiritual doctrine emphasizing the forthcoming appearance of a new prophet or messenger of God. Of course, this is Babism here. The prediction of him as the gateway to this coming prophet or messenger of God who would overturn old beliefs and customs and usher in a new era. And though new, these beliefs originated in Shiite Islam, which believed in the forthcoming return of the 12th Imam, the successor of Muhammad. So it's within the existing ideology of Islam, this belief in this 12th Imam. And this is sort of someone who's saying this is going to happen now. And he proclaims himself to be the Bab, the gateway to the coming of that Imam. And so this Imam, then this prophet, the successor of Islam, of Muhammad, is supposed to be someone who's going to overturn old beliefs and customs and usher in a new era. And so, in another quote from Britannica, it talks about, despite their apparent differences, the world's religions, according to the Baha'i teach an identical truth, and the function of the leader of Baha'i, whose name is Baha'u'llah, his particular function was to overcome the disunity of religions and establish universal faith. So we have a question here largely about whether or not that was accomplished. Did Babism, did Baha'ism overcome other religions' disunity, bring them together, establish them in a unified religion, creating a new era of religious outlook of unified religions? And the answer to that is not really. The success of Babism and Baha'ism, although measurable, don't really amount to the idea of a new era of religious understanding and uniting all different religions. Certainly this isn't something they accomplished by the time that either of those two figures died, as we'll find out here. So that prediction isn't something we can really look at and say this definitively came to pass and therefore we should believe these religions. There's nothing really there for us to use to confirm or corroborate the claims of the religion, or that these two men were really doing God's work or had a message from God. Another aspect of this, however, is the idea of who this Imam is and whether or not the Imam actually came forth as was predicted by the Bab. So according to Britannica, the Bab, late in his active period, Ali Muhammad, which is another name for the Bab, his original name, had abandoned the title Bab and considered himself no longer merely the gateway to the expected 12th Imam, but he considered himself to be the Imam himself. So the Bab starts off by proclaiming he's basically the forerunner, the gateway to this coming Imam, but then later says, no, I'm not just the gateway to the Imam, I'm the Imam himself, I am the great prophet himself. And now the interesting part, however, is that that's Babism. Based on his prophecies, the prophecies of the Bab, also we find Baha'ism, because according to the Columbia Encyclopedia, Baha'ism is a religion founded by Baha'u'llah, who promulgated it says his doctrinal outgrowth of Babism, with Baha'u'llah as the promised one of the earlier religions. So what we find is that the Bab proclaims himself to be the Imam, and then one of his disciples, Baha'u'llah, proclaims himself also to be this Imam. So they're both claiming to be the fulfillment of the prediction of Babism. And that they can't both be true. So if Babism is true, then the Bab himself must be viewed as the Imam. If Baha'ism is true, then they're in a real predicament, because they're now contradicting the prophet, the Bab, who predicted the Imam. Right? Because the Bab claimed that he himself was the Imam, and the Baha'is are using his prophecy as the basis of their religion, are contradicting him when they say that no, he wasn't in fact the Imam, that this other individual, Allah, was the Imam. So there's a contradiction there, particularly for Baha'ism. It's the prophetic that it would use, the prophecy that we use as confirmation actually ends up being something that disconfirms the religion because of this conflict. And so what we find out is that both men suffered sort of imprisonment and eventual death here before they were able to establish any kind of new era of world religious unity. According to Britannica, the Bab was arrested, and after several years of incarceration, he was executed in 1850. And similarly, the Columbia Encyclopedia tells us concerning Baha'u'llah that he spent most of his adult life in prison under close surveillance. He died in Accra, and his tomb there is one of the monuments of the Baha'i faith. So they both die after spending many, many years in prison with no real discernible change in terms of the era in which we live, or religious unity. They just added another religion to the chart. Additionally, we might note that Baha'ism is mystical in nature to a very large extent. According to Wikipedia, its mystical teachings, there exist a number of foundational texts that have been described as mystical. Something called the Seven Valleys is considered Baha'u'llah's greatest mystical composition, set forth the stages of the soul's journey towards God. And so when it comes to Babism and Baha'ism, we can categorize that as an Islamic outgrowth. Its historical documentation depends on that of Islam, which then, of course, in turn depends on that of Old Testament and New Testament. And it's effectively mystical. And so out of Islam grows another mystical sect. Lastly, I want to talk here very quickly about neo-paganism, Druidry, the occult, witchcraft, and the New Age, all of which are sort of modern resurgences or attempts to recreate ancient religions. But because we're near the end of this video series here, I want to sort of stop for a second and come back and look at these in just a moment.